Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. We all know that COVID has accelerated digital transformation and the adoption of artificial intelligence. What we don't know is how these large, highly regulated enterprises are coping with this adoption. We have an amazing set of panelists today. These are chief executives from Global 2000 organizations, and they'll tell us about the challenges and the opportunities of bringing in digital transformation to these highly regulated enterprises, especially in the COVID era. So really appreciate Kathy, Tim, and Stefan for being with us here today. So we would love to hear from you. How has COVID affected your industry or your business?
Yeah, it's been quite an experience. Like for everybody else, at a company level, I think that broad portfolio helped us soften some of the impacts. I think everybody was suffering. Also, our industry is suffering. Our company is suffering. But the broad portfolio definitely helped. We hope to have seen the bottom during the second quarter of 2020, and we hope that, depending on the businesses and the industries that our businesses are in, that we're going to see a bump back. We don't think it's going to bump back to the levels pre-COVID, but we hope that it's going to bump back to a reasonable level. And from that, I think we would hope to see a stable growth. Now, that is going to be different. The example of the automotive industry, you can imagine that has tanked very much, and it will probably take years to come back to levels where it's been before. The agrochemicals business that we are in too, has not taken such a big hit, and we would hope that things are coming back to normal in a faster fashion. So overall, I think my company says and is in a position to ride out the crisis. Obviously, it helps that we have this broad portfolio. It's a financially very conservative company as well. That has helped. We were keeping cash together. We keep on doing that. So I'd say I don't want to complain. We're going to ride this out. And then there is lots of opportunities in the crisis, and what we are going to talk about is one of these opportunities, and hopefully we can catch some of these opportunities.
At Principal, we provide insurance solutions, retirement planning, capital investments for customers that are predominantly in small and mid-sized businesses. So you can imagine the impact that they have had with COVID. And so a lot of what we've been doing is listening to them to find creative ways to help serve them and help them get through these tough times. As Tim said, their expectations are different now. They want to interact with us differently, much more digitally. We've been lucky that we had started on a digital journey, and so that we could serve them different. But at the same time, our employees want to work differently as well. Many of them will likely want to remain remote. And so we're finding ways to work differently than we used to, as well as serve customers. So from a technology perspective, it's some great problems to have. It enables us to leverage technology in different ways to really serve our customers differently than we have in the past. So it's all about listening to them and being able to respond with solutions that really meet their needs now.
What are some of the challenges that you faced in bringing in transformation at these highly regulated companies?
It's a really interesting challenge, and I've worked in financial services almost all of my career in one way or another, and obviously financial services is highly regulated. Clearly, regulation tends to gravitate towards those businesses that are very important societally. No one regulates anything that just doesn't matter. It tends to affect industries that have lots of consumer impacts, and also tends to gravitate towards industries that present certain kinds of risks, and so really trying to mitigate what those risks are. I'd say, in financial services, there's been a lot of promise about how technology can transform those businesses, but they've been burdened by legacy technology. There's a lot of tech debt in financial services. Many companies are still running on platforms that are 20, 30, even 40 years old. I certainly saw that at many of the institutions that I've worked at in the past. And so one risk is just getting everybody comfortable, including regulators, with the idea that you can actually undertake these transformations without breaking things. Trying to avoid major disruption, either in terms of the fundamentals of the business or impacts on consumers, is a big challenge. And then I think there's always a certain amount of skepticism in the regulatory community. They get paid to be professional skeptics and ask a lot of hard questions. So when you come forward and you say, I have this new technology and it's going to do all these great things, you need to be able to answer the hard questions about, well, what about this and what about that, and why is this any different than or better than the way you used to do it? And I think that the good news is, at least what I see in financial services, is that regulators have become much more open-minded as they've seen the impact of technology across many industries. And while they want to mitigate against downside risk, including unfortunate consequences to consumers, I think they've actually become much more open. You certainly see that among the banking regulators in the United States that have, in many cases, set up their own innovation divisions within their organizations to understand the technologies, understand the use cases for them, and really try to develop best practices that the regulatee can adopt and follow.
My business, my industry is obviously like old economy industry. We make stuff, we produce stuff that you can feel, touch, and smell. Goes back over 150 years, that industry, and it's a dangerous industry. So it's highly regulated in that sense. What we make, what we ship, what we transport, everything is regulated. So one of the challenges was and is, to show the regulator, hey, we can survive, we can work with technology in an environment like COVID. My company was open throughout the pandemic. We have over 100 facilities here in the US. Almost all of them were open. Office buildings obviously were closed, but everything that was manufacturing and laboratory was open. We had to interact with all state agencies that were trying to, keep people safe and take care of the health situation for people in those different states. I think what has really changed, what COVID has changed, is the mindset of how regulators approach issues with us now. We had to make sure that the police didn't stop our workers on their way to our facilities, right? And we needed to make sure that they have the paperwork in place from the agencies, with the agencies, to prove that they were essential workers. Everything was so much easier than without the COVID, I tell you, the interaction. And I hope that this mind shift change, that electronics and digital working can help us, would stay beyond COVID. On the back end of regulation, we often have to deal with the justice system. Everybody was expecting the justice system to stop. I can tell you they've adjusted very easily, very quickly. All the cases that we manage moved on. They moved to Zoom. Who would have thought that a 70-year-old judge, in a case, would move to a Zoom meeting from one day to the other. So I hope, these things have proven to people, the power of technology, and that will stay.
Are these large organizations set up or gearing up to work with startups?
So I think it's a really, really interesting question. And I think it varies. There are some large organizations that are well set up to deal with this, but I would say they are the exception rather than the rule. Most are sort of mediocre at best at this, and there are a lot that are really quite bad at it. It was one of the things that, frankly, that I worked really hard at when I was at Fannie Mae, because one of my goals there after getting the company back to profitability was to try to use the company and its adoption of technology and its endorsement of technology to move housing finance into the 21st century, which is a business that historically has been very labor intensive and very paper based. And I'd say that, you know, there's some real challenges here that are difficult to overcome. First is, it's often difficult for a small startup to even know how to even find the front door of a large organization. So if you are a large organization and you want to facilitate these communications, you have to mark the front door very clearly and say, here is the place where if you're a startup technology company and you want to interact with us, this is the right place to come, and make that a dedicated function that's really focused on learning as much as possible about what's out there, and then being a liaison to others inside of the company who are interested in exploring those things. The second thing is to try to reduce the number of hurdles as much as possible. First, the sense of time in a big organization versus a startup is radically different. A year at a big company, like a big bank, is nothing. A year in the life cycle of a startup could be the beginning, middle, and end of the whole enterprise. And so you need to, if you want to be successful as a large organization in doing this, you need to figure out how to move quickly. And part of that means identifying bite-sized pilots that you can experiment with and try to gain some traction very, very quickly. And then the third is, you know, the bureaucracy of big companies will just crush these experiments. You know, the vendor management processes. If you have to be able to survive a serious vendor management process as a startup, you know, you might not ever see the other side of it. So as a big company, you need to be willing to experiment, to create exceptions to those processes in order to facilitate the experimentation. And then as you kind of scale and try to put it into full-scale production, then you can bring some of that traditional process and oversight into play. And there are many other things as well, but those are three things that I say, you know, you really need to do if you're serious about, as a big company, if you want to be serious about exploring startup technologies, those are three things you can do, but it takes real effort.
To add on to Tim, at Principal, we have a whole team who is constantly looking at startups and different companies, and we're all kind of expected to know some of, you know, to be attuned to what's going on. We have purchased some startup companies and also have relationships with many, but there is this finding the way to work with them that preserves their ability to be innovative and entrepreneurial and move at a speed that they're attuned to while also interacting with us. And it is certainly not easy to do. We have a few examples where you know, we could have done better, the startup could have done better, but it's a learning thing and continuing to learn from each of these relationships, but also not to be afraid, not to assume because you're a big company that you couldn't possibly leverage startups. I think in every one of our relationships and even meetings that we have with them, there is always something to be learned for sure.